There are men who have never been insulted to their face, never punched, never betrayed, never screamed at, and yet they are dying, quietly, efficiently, every single day, not from wounds, but from obedience, from the way they say, "I'm fine," when they're burning inside, from how they agree just to keep the peace, from how they shrink themselves to avoid disappointing anyone. They call it maturity. They call it peace. They say it's wisdom. But peace without boundaries is just a beautiful cage. And wisdom without power is just permission to be ignored. You weren't born weak. You were trained to be liked. From childhood, you were told, be nice. Don't make a scene. Don't upset anyone. So you smiled when you were uncomfortable. You forgave what never deserved forgiveness. You waited and waited to be chosen. That wasn't kindness. That was emotional captivity. Machiavelli never taught men how to be liked. He taught them how to be feared when needed and respected by design. The most dangerous addiction, the need for approval. If you want to be free, you must first kill the most dangerous addiction of all, the addiction to being liked. Because as long as you need approval, you are owned. And today, we end that ownership, not with a war, but with a quiet execution. It starts with a smile and ends with disappearing. It never starts with a scream. It starts with a polite nod when your soul screams no. A forced chuckle at a joke that cuts too deep. A quiet "it's fine" when everything in you is breaking and the world applauds. They call you nice, easy, emotionally mature. But inside you're disappearing, piece by piece. You trade your fire for silence, your truth for tolerance, your boundaries for applause. And no one notices because the performance is flawless. Kindness without a backbone is not virtue. It's erasure. You know how to comfort others while bleeding out quietly. You know how to make them feel seen, even when you feel invisible. But kindness without a backbone is not virtue. It's erasure. And the applause you hear, it's not admiration. It's approval for how well you've buried yourself. People don't value nice. They exploit it. They know. You'll say yes before you've even had time to think. You'll apologize even when you're the one bleeding. You'd rather hurt yourself than hurt their feelings. So they push, and you keep absorbing. Not because you're weak, but because you were raised to believe that pleasing people is how you stay safe. But safety without sovereignty? That's not safety. It's slavery with better lighting. How much of yourself have you swallowed? How many times have you said yes just to avoid tension? How many times have you swallowed your voice so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable? How much of your dignity have you bled out in smiles? Machiavelli warned, he who does not assert himself is quickly forgotten. And what he didn't say, being forgotten while you're still alive is the most brutal form of death. Respect is earned through friction, not softness. The world doesn't respect kindness that comes from fear. It respects boundaries sharpened by clarity, because respect is not earned through softness. It's earned through friction. You can be kind, but if your kindness has no walls, you become a hallway. Everyone walks through you, but no one stays. When was the last time you said no without explaining? When was the last time you walked away without guilt? When was the last time you stopped apologizing for simply being you? You think people love you for your kindness, but often they love you for your compliance, your silence, your predictability. They don't love your strength. They love that you've hidden it. They don't love your depth. They love that you never require them to swim in it. The brutal truth, the more agreeable you are, the more forgettable you become. They stop listening because you never push back. They stop trying because you never ask for more. They stop showing up because you never make them earn your presence. And eventually, you begin to fade in rooms you never should have had to beg to enter. Today, that ends. Not with noise, not with anger, with precision. You are not here to be everyone's comfort zone. You are not here to be tolerated. You are not here to explain why your soul deserves to breathe. You are here to be respected. And respect begins the moment you stop lowering your voice so others don't feel small in the presence of your truth. From now on, you speak with weight. You move with finality. You give without apology. You leave without a second thought when your value is not recognized. Because being nice is no longer the goal. Being whole is. They didn't need to beat you to control you. They just needed to train you to please. And they started early. Be nice. Say sorry. Don't join. Smile when you're hurt. Agree when you disagree. They called it being good. But really, they were building a cage called emotional obedience. You weren't taught how to think. You were taught how to conform. You learned that peace was more important than truth, that harmony mattered more than honesty, and you became fluent in the language of self-erasure. You smiled to survive. You forgave to keep the peace. You nodded to avoid confrontation. But over time, you began to vanish, not physically, spiritually. Your voice got quieter. Your standards got lower. Your presence became an echo. They didn't even need to force it, because you internalized a leash. You thought love meant being agreeable. But that was control masked as morality. The more predictable you become, the easier you are to manipulate. And you were easy, not because you lacked strength, but because you were punished for using it. You were rewarded for obedience. And so you kept shrinking until your silence became their comfort. The hard truth: the more emotionally obedient you are, the more invisible you become. Not because people are cruel, but because they're conditioned to value resistance. People respect what pushes back, draws lines, makes them adjust. And when you stop doing that, they stop seeing you as human. You become a service, not a soul. A yes man, not a force. A beautifully wrapped box with nothing left inside. When did being liked become more important than being real? When did you decide that your truth was optional if it made someone else uncomfortable? When did your comfort become the last item on your own list? They didn't chain you to a wall. They just taught you to hold the chain yourself. And every time you say yes when you mean no, you tighten it. You apologize for your needs. You polish it. You suppress your instincts. You make that chain look like jewelry, but it's still a chain. And if you keep wearing it, you will never know what your life feels like without someone else's hand on the thermostat of your emotions. The way out: break the reward system. You have to stop treating peace as the ultimate prize, because peace built on your silence is not peace. It's compliance with a prettier name. You don't owe them comfort. You owe yourself clarity. Clarity that says, this is my line. I don't owe you an explanation. If being honest means losing you, then losing you is alignment. They'll push back, let them. They'll call you difficult, cold, selfish. But that's not a reflection of who you are. It's grief. Grief for the version of you they could control. Grief for the version of you who bled quietly and called it grace. That version is gone. And in its place is someone who remembers how to speak without asking for permission, how to walk without leaving a map, how to say no and not explain a single word. This is a rebellion, it's reclamation, because obedience was never love. It was survival. But now, you're done surviving. Now you start leading. Power doesn't always wear a crown. Sometimes it wears silence. People don't fear the loud. They fear the unreadable, the ones who don't flinch, don't explain, don't react. Because most people are emotional engineers. They know what to say to make you doubt yourself, what tone to use to make you apologize, what silence to weaponize to make you chase. But what happens when their tactics stop working? Panic, because suddenly you're no longer predictable, and predictability is the foundation of control. You become a mirror with no reflection. They were never responding to you. They were responding to how you responded to them. And now, you become a mirror with no reflection. They can't read you. They can't guilt you. They can't bait you. You've killed the emotional feedback loop they used to feed on. Now they throw out hooks and get nothing back. No over-explaining. No justifying. No damage control. Just stillness. Pure surgical stillness. And in that stillness, they start seeing the truth. Not about you, but about themselves. The shift from needing people to being needed. The moment you stop needing people is the moment they start needing you. Not because you became more charming, but because you became more rare. Scarcity is power. And nothing is more scarce than a soul that no longer chases. You are no longer in the game. You are the board. They're trying to read you, and they're losing. Machiavelli once said, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." But what he meant was deeper. He understood that being unreadable is more powerful than being adored, because the unknown is unmanageable, and unmanageable people become gravity. The final shift, from emotional availability to emotional sovereignty. You didn't argue. You vanished. You didn't correct them. You outgrew them. And now, they don't know what version of you they're dealing with. So they walk on eggshells around the very ground they once danced on freely. That's a shift. You've moved from being emotionally available to being emotionally sovereign, from being readable to being revered. And it's not because you're cruel. It's because you've recalibrated access. The brutal truth, the more you give less, the more they give more. They thought they had you, but they had your hunger, your insecurity, your unhealed self. Now, they face your sovereignty, and they don't know how to touch it without shattering their illusions, because you're not acting cold, you're acting clean. Clean from neediness, clean from compulsive pleasing, clean from the decay of being too available. The final lesson: respect is not something you chase, it's something you radiate. Respect grows in the space you refuse to fill, in the silence you refuse to break. It is sculpted in mystery and solidified by discipline. Not everyone will like you, and that is the point, because if everyone likes you, you are too available to be remembered, too compromised to be trusted. Machiavelli understood this. He didn't teach men to be loved. He taught them to be respected without negotiation. You are no longer a name. You are a standard. You don't argue anymore. You don't beg. You don't prove. You walk. Not to leave, but to reveal what they were too blind to appreciate. You don't slam doors. You just vanish with gravity. And that absence becomes legend. The final truth. You want to be liked. Now you become untouchable. When they ask what happened to you, tell them, nothing happened. I just stopped asking for permission to exist. The unshackled man, how silence becomes your sharpest weapon. There comes a point where silence is no longer a defense. It becomes a weapon. Every time you explain yourself, you give away leverage. You hand them the blueprint to how you think, how you break, how you can be managed. And for what? Understanding? Validation? Approval? Let me say it clearly. You owe no explanation for choosing peace over performance. You owe no justification for walking away from people who kept you small. You owe no reasoning for cutting ties with energy that kept pulling you backward. You weren't born to translate your worth into a language others barely bother to learn. You were born to walk in your truth, even when it echoes in rooms full of silence. Because silence doesn't mean absence. It means control. It means composure. It means you no longer negotiate with chaos. People will panic when you stop explaining. Explanation was the bridge they walked on to reach your mind and mold your decisions. Now that bridge is gone. They speak. You nod. They accuse. You blink. They withdraw. You don't follow. That's not arrogance. That's emotional sovereignty. Machiavelli understood that power isn't always in the sword. Sometimes it's in the pause, in the ability to make others question themselves, in the void you leave when you say nothing. Because when you stop performing, they start projecting. And those projections often reveal more about their fears than your silence ever will. Let them misunderstand you. You don't need to correct their story. Let them get it wrong. Think you're cold. Assume you're cruel. Whisper half-truths to feel better about your distance. Explanation is negotiation, and your life is no longer up for analysis. They say silence is confusing, but it's not. It's clarity in disguise. It says, I see what you're doing, and I'm no longer playing. You don't have access to the emotional version of me you once knew. If you want to stay in my life, you have to earn it, not interrogate it. You are not here to be decoded. You are not here to be legible to the ones who only value you when you're explaining your pain in a way that makes them feel comfortable. You don't owe anyone a step-by-step manual for your transformation. They weren't there in the nights you cried alone. They didn't hold your hand when you were rebuilding your spine. They didn't carry your shame when you chose healing over history. So they don't get to audit your clarity. Speak less, land more. You speak less now because you've realized your voice is a privilege, not a right. You don't raise your tone. You raise your standard. And anyone who wants to remain must learn the new language, a language with fewer apologies, fewer second chances, fewer emotional discounts. Respect is not about being liked. It's about being felt. You've stopped announcing your growth. Now, you simply arrive as a version of yourself that no longer seeks to be understood, because understanding is not always the goal. Alignment is. And if someone cannot meet you there, no amount of explaining will save the connection. So you stay silent, not out of spite, out of wisdom. The final shift from begging to becoming. You are not unreachable. You are untouchable to those who refuse to rise to your frequency. Let them wonder. Replay the last words you said. Sit in the tension of your unanswered message, because your silence is not passive. It's surgical. It cuts through noise. It exposes motive. It separates the curious from the worthy. You didn't walk away to be chased. You walked away because you stopped explaining your presence to people who never deserved it. And when they ask what happened to you, the answer is simple. You stopped making yourself digestible to people who only respected you when you were starving. Now, you speak only when the silence costs more than your words. You were never meant to be liked. That was a trap, wrapped in praise, tied with approval. They told you, if you're nice enough, quiet enough, forgiving enough, you'll be loved. What they didn't tell you, being loved on those terms requires you to disappear, because the more you seek to be liked, the more you shrink into shapes that were never meant to contain you. You begin bending, filtering, watering yourself down until what they like isn't you but the performance, the illusion of likability. You thought, if they like me, they won't hurt me. If they approve of me, they won't leave. But that's not how the world works. People don't respect performers. They enjoy them until they get bored, and then they look for the next act. Respect is different. Respect doesn't care if you're agreeable. Respect begins when you stop negotiating your worth to avoid discomfort, because discomfort is where true presence begins. You don't build respect by saying yes. You build it by saying no and meaning it. You build it by walking away with no explanation, standing your ground when everyone else wants you to fold. Machiavelli didn't teach men to be loved. He taught them to be feared if necessary, but more importantly, he taught them to be respected without negotiation. And that respect begins the moment you stop asking, do they like me? And start asking, do I still respect myself after this interaction? When you're liked versus, when you're respected. When you're liked, they smile in your face. When you're respected, they adjust their tone. When you're liked, they invite you in. When you're respected, they think twice before crossing a line. Because respect comes not from being palatable, but from being uncompromising. They won't say out loud, but they know the old version of you was easy to manage. They liked that you were nice, didn't push back, absorbed discomfort so no one else had to feel it. But now, they don't know where they stand, because you no longer flinch when they frown, no longer apologize for setting limits, no longer dilute your depth for their emotional convenience. And that unsettles them. Let them call you difficult. They'll say you've changed. Yes, you have. You've changed from someone who sought inclusion to someone who commands space, someone who feared rejection to someone who walks away without losing sleep. You become someone they prepare for, not someone they assume. And that's what makes you a presence. Not your smile, not your sweetness, but your refusal to disappear to make others feel comfortable. Respect is not about being feared. It's about being felt. Felt when you enter the room. Felt when you say nothing. Felt when they reach out and realize you're no longer reachable at the cost of your self-respect. You're no longer trying to be understood by those who only listen when you're apologizing. You're no longer available for connections that require you to abandon yourself. And in that withdrawal, you become the standard. The moment you stop needing people is the moment they start needing you. Not because you became more charming, but because you became more rare. Scarcity is power. And nothing is more scarce than a soul that no longer chases. You use to orbit them, adjusting your tone to avoid rejection, monitoring your words like a child begging for permission, shrinking your truth so they wouldn't flinch. But now, you reverse the axis. You are the gravity, and they are the ones spinning in uncertainty. They study your silence like a language they can't decode. You don't reply instantly. You don't explain the silence. You don't perform emotional CPR when the room gets quiet. You've stopped proving you're worthy of connection. Instead, you become a mirror, still precise, unapologetic. And in that reflection, they see themselves for the first time without your accommodation. They'll call you cold. Let them. That's what they say when your warmth is no longer free. They'll say you've changed. That's what they say when they're no longer allowed to walk into your life with muddy shoes. You were never here to be everything to everyone. You were here to be true. True to your core. True to your calling. True to the boundaries that guard your worth. And if that truth costs you approval, so be it. Because the love that leaves when you stop bleeding was never love. It was dependency dressed as devotion. And now, you choose differently. Not colder, just clearer. Final truth. You want to be liked. Now you become untouchable. And when they ask what happened to you, tell them, nothing happened. I just stopped asking for permission to exist.